Hey friends, it's Dimitri with Nebraska Streetwear. So in front of me here I have 3 t-shirts and 3 guides to give you guys a better idea on how to do graphic placement for your t-shirts that you're printing. So some of you might be printing your own t-shirts by yourself, some of you might be handing off artwork to a printer to do. And one thing that you got to know is that if you don't adequately explain how you want your t-shirt graphic to be printed in terms of the placement, they're going to go off on their own sort of standard and metric that they use. So a typical standard that a lot of printers use is called a 4-finger method. This is basically when you lay 4 fingers down from the collar, that is where the start of your graphic is, and they'll print downwards from there. Now, that is an okay method for some prints, but in my opinion, and after you watch this video, I think you will agree with me, this is not an adequate way to print all of your t-shirts, and it really varies depending on the design. So one design principle, one very important point is that when you have a design, it's not just a free-floating design or piece of artwork. It's interacting with the space around it. So you have to place your design or artwork in a certain way for it to look good and to look aesthetic. And it's gonna alter the way that your artwork or design looks if you place it a certain way. So always keep that in mind. This is why using just a 4-finger method is not really the standard that you need for everything that you're trying to print. So in front of me here, I just printed out these 3 quick guides, and I put a center line and a chest line in the center. So basically your artwork is getting placed based off these 2 variables, and that's what you should be thinking about while you're sending out your files or printing them yourselves. And I basically drew out 3 common sizes of your design or artwork. So the first one is basically a small line of text. There are people that make t-shirts like that where they have a very small line of text. That's represented by this line right here. Or your logo or a larger version of that text, and that's represented by this box right here. So when you are trying to print something like this, especially a logo tee, let's say that you're starting your brand and you really want a really solid logo tee, you want to increase the amount of space between the collar and the top of your design. The reason why is because it aesthetically looks better. You don't want your artwork or your logo too high up. This is something that I see a lot of beginner brands, including myself. It's something that I struggled with in the beginning. A lot of people always place their artwork way too high up because, most likely from the printer, they're just printing it off their standard, and they're not keeping that in mind, that the smaller the artwork is, the larger this gap needs to be in order for it to look aesthetically pleasing. The first brand where I really learned this from or noticed it by paying attention was from Supreme, that popular streetwear brand. They are very good at doing this when they print their t-shirts. They always have it much lower from the collar, and it's always on the center chest line. It's not high up here. As your artwork gets bigger, this gap between the collar and the center chest line is going to get narrower because your artwork is expanding. And aesthetically, it looks better when your artwork, when this gap right here between the bottom of the collar and the artwork is getting smaller as the artwork is getting bigger. And I put 2 variations here. So here is a common size artwork that you might do. This could also be a circle, but for this demonstration, it's just a rectangle, or it could be a square. And then when that artwork is rotated, a lot of artwork, you might have it like this big. It could also be like that. And the distance between the bottom of the collar and the top of your artwork, it's not dramatically smaller, but it is smaller than if you just had your logo or a small line of text or something like that. Then we move on to a very common, very standard size artwork, and that's basically a full front. A lot of people do this, and this is where the 4-finger method, I think, is adequate and it works. Here is an example of a 4-finger method, and this is I had the printers make it like this because I wanted it to be like that. This graphic, since it's growing larger, it looks awkward if you bring it down too far. That's why this graphic would not work if you printed it like this, and I'll show you why. It would look something like this. And when you wear a t-shirt like that, it kind of looks awkward, to be honest. It's purely a visual and aesthetic design concept. That is why you want to make sure that you pay attention to this gap right here. So in conclusion, as your artwork grows, the gap between the collar and the top of your artwork will shrink. As your artwork shrinks, the gap between the bottom of the collar and the top of your artwork will grow. And if you pay attention to this placement, if you take some time to, work that out with your printers or yourself, your t-shirt is going to look a lot better. It's going to look a lot more professional. And people really do notice these things, because when people put on a t-shirt, your graphic can look kind of weird depending on if you had the placement right. And I'll show you some previous shirts that I did in the past. Here's one where the first placement would be the correct one. Now, in hindsight, I would have made this even lower. This is not exactly to this standard right here that I had out, because this is an older t-shirt and a different company printed it. I had problems with this printer. They would not really place my graphics the way I wanted it to. I'd always tell them a certain size, but they would go off their own standards, so that was very frustrating. And then when I switched to a new printer, they in fact always asked me how far down from the collar I wanted it to be printed, and then from now on I would just tell them, and they know. These two shirts are from the same printer, but there's a dramatic difference between the artwork from the collar down to the top of the artwork. This one's different. So as you could see, these are some common placements, and if you do this, your t-shirts are going to look a lot better. So that's what I recommend. Some of this is subjective, but I think if you study other very popular streetwear brands or other clothing brands, higher end brands, you're going to see that they do pay attention to this. The placement really matters with your design and the clothing and all that. If you got any value of this video, or if you have any comments or questions, you can leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys later. Thanks.